The mid-July heat rose off the asphalt in shimmering, oily waves, distorting the air around the solitary gas pumps of the dust-choked station, just off Route 66. It was the kind of heat that stuck your shirt to your back and made the air taste like burnt rubber and exhaust. AT pump number 4. A massive machine of chrome and black steel ticked and pinged as it cooled. It was a custom Harley Davidson, a beast of a bike that looked like it had been forged in a thunderstorm. Standing next to it, fueling the tank, was a man who looked like he could wrestle a grizzly bear and win. His name was Grizz, and he was the sergeant-at-arms for the Iron Reapers Motorcycle Club. He stood 6'4", his arms covered in ink that told stories of battles fought and brothers lost. He wore a leather cut, a vest weathered by wind, rain, and years of hard riding. The patches on the back were faded but proud. Inside a beat-up sedan at the next pump, a small, pale face pressed against the glass. 7-year-old Leo watched the giant man with eyes wide as saucers. Leo's mother, Sarah, was inside paying for $10 of gas, nervously glancing out the window at the biker, hoping to avoid any trouble. But Leo wasn't scared. He was mesmerized. He slowly opened the car door, his worn-out sneakers hitting the hot pavement. He walked toward the giant, clutching a small, dirty action figure in his hand. Grizz didn't notice him at first. He was focused on the flowing gasoline, lost in his own thoughts. Leo tugged on the edge of the biker's heavy denim jeans. Grizz looked down, startled, his scowl deepening. He expected a beggar or a nuisance. Instead, he saw a boy with messy hair and eyes full of a sorrow far too deep for a 7-year-old. The boy pointed a shaking finger at the patches on Grizz's chest and whispered, "My dad had patches like yours." Before we see what happens next, if you believe that true heroes often wear the strangest disguises, please hit that like button and subscribe to Biker Stories right now. It helps us bring you more powerful tales of justice. The silence that followed the boy's words was heavier than the humid air around them. Grizz, a man known for his short temper and iron fists, froze. The fuel nozzle clicked off in his hand, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet station. He looked down at the boy, really looked at him. He saw the frayed collar of the kid's t-shirt, the scuff marks on his knees, and the way his lower lip trembled ever so slightly. Trying to be brave, Grizz slowly hung up the nozzle, wiping his hands on a rag tucked into his belt. He crouched down, his leather vest creaking, until he was eye level with Leo. The intimidation factor usually sent grown men running, but this kid stood his ground. "Your dad rode?" Grizz asked, his voice a low rumble, like gravel tumbling in a dryer. Leo nodded, looking down at his shoes. "Yes, sir. He had a vest. It had a big eagle on the back. But he doesn't wear it anymore." "Why's that little man? He sell the bike?" Leo shook his head violently, and a single tear escaped, cutting a clean line through the dust on his cheek. "No. The bad men in the desert took him. Mom says he's watching from the sky now. But he left his vest. It smells like him." Grizz felt a punch in his gut that hit harder than any bar brawl. The bad men in the desert. He knew exactly what that meant. The boy's father had been a soldier, likely killed in action overseas. And the patches the boy was talking about were unit insignias. Not biker colors, but to a 7-year-old's eyes. The Brotherhood, the leather, and the pride looked exactly the same. Just then, Sarah came rushing out of the convenience store, her face pale with panic. "Leo, Leo, get away from there." She ran over, grabbing the boy by the shoulders and pulling him back, her eyes darting fearfully to Grizz's face. "I am so sorry, sir. He knows not to bother strangers. We're leaving right now." Grizz stood up to his full height, casting a long shadow over the mother and son. Sarah flinched, expecting a curse or a threat. Instead, Grizz slowly removed his sunglasses, revealing eyes that were surprisingly kind. "He's no bother, ma'am," Grizz said softly. "He was just telling me about his father. Sounds like he was a good man." Sarah's shoulders slumped, the adrenaline draining away to leave just the exhaustion of a single mother trying to survive. He was the best. We just miss him. Leo especially. It's coming up on 2 years, and Leo is having a hard time at school. The other kids, they don't understand." Grizz nodded slowly. He looked at the boy again. "What's your name, son?" "Leo," the boy whispered. "I'm Grizz. You take care of your mom, you hear? That's what your dad would want." "I will," Leo said, Puffing out his small chest, Grizz reached into his pocket and pulled out a challenge coin, a heavy piece of brass with the club's Reaper logo on one side and a motto about loyalty on the other. He pressed it into Leo's small palm. "You keep that. It's for bravery. You were brave coming up to talk to me." Sarah hurried Leo back to the car, offering a grateful, albeit confused, smile to the biker. As they drove away, Leo pressed his face to the rear window, watching the giant man until the car turned the corner. Grizz stood there for a long time. He didn't start his bike immediately. He lit a cigarette, the smoke curling up into the hot afternoon sky. He couldn't shake the look in that kid's eyes. It was a look he had seen in the mirror many times. The look of a hole in the soul that nothing seems to fill. He pulled out his phone. He didn't dial a friend. He dialed the clubhouse. "Top," Grizz said when the president answered. "Yeah, I'm 10 minutes out. Call the boys in. We got a situation." "No trouble. Just something we need to fix." "Yeah, it involves a soldier." The ride back to the clubhouse was a blur. The wind whipped past Grizz, but his mind was back at that gas station. He thought about the boys' loneliness. He thought about the eagle on the back. He knew that feeling of brotherhood. Bikers and soldiers, they were cut from the same cloth. Different wars, different uniforms, but the same code. You never leave a man behind. And you certainly don't leave his family behind. When Grizz rolled into the compound, 30 bikes were already lined up. The air smelled of oil and old timber. The clubhouse was a sanctuary, a place where the world's rules didn't apply, only their rules. He walked into the meeting room, the heavy wooden doors thudding shut behind him. The room fell silent. 32 men, the hardest of the hard, looked at him. "I met a kid today," Grizz started, pacing the floor. "Little guy? Named Leo. Lost his dad in the sandbox. Kid walked up to me and told me his dad had patches like mine. He's hurting, brothers. Mom's scared, struggling. The kid feels alone." "So what's the plan, Grizz?" asked Top, a gray-bearded man who had been running the club for 20 years. "I did some digging while I rode," Grizz lied. He had actually called a contact in the police department to run the plate of the sedan he saw. Found out where they live. Found out something else, too. Next Friday is the Donuts with Dad's event at the elementary school. You know the type. Every kid brings their old man. They eat donuts, show off their projects. And Leo? He's going to be the only one sitting there alone. A low murmur of anger and sympathy rippled through the room. These men were outlaws to some, but many were fathers, and some were veterans. The thought of a soldier's son sitting alone while other kids bragged about their dads didn't sit right. It violated the code. "We can't have that," Top said, crossing his massive arms. "No, we can't," Grizz agreed. "I told the kid his dad had patches like ours. I think it's time we showed him what that means." For the next week, the club was busy. It wasn't the usual business of protecting territory or running runs. They were polishing chrome. They were buying toys. They were coordinating with the school principal, a terrified man who eventually agreed after Top explained their intentions and made a generous donation to the school's library fund. Friday morning arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum. Rain threatened, but held off at the small suburban house. The mood was somber. Leo sat at the kitchen table, pushing his cereal around with a spoon. He was wearing his best shirt, a plaid button-down that used to be his favorite, but today it felt like a costume. "Do I have to go, Mom?" Leo asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I can just stay home. I'm not hungry for donuts." Sarah's heart broke. She smoothed his hair back. "I know it's hard, baby, but we can't hide. Your dad was brave. We have to be brave, too. I'll be there with you. We can eat donuts together." "It's not the same," Leo mumbled. "Everyone looks at me. They look at the empty chair." They drove to the school in silence. The parking lot was already filling up with SUVs and sedans. Men in suits, men in work uniforms, men in jerseys. Fathers of all kinds were walking their children toward the gymnasium entrance. Holding hands, laughing, carrying coffees, Leo walked with his head down, clutching his mother's hand so tight his knuckles turned white. They entered the gym. The smell of sugary glaze and cheap coffee filled the air. Tables were set up with colorful tablecloths. It was a cacophony of happy noise. Leo and Sarah found a small table in the corner, far away from the center of the action. Leo sat down and stared at the plastic tablecloth. He didn't want a donut. He just wanted to disappear. He felt the eyes of the other kids. He heard a boy at the next table say, Where's his dad? And the shushing of a parent. It burned. It burned like fire. Sarah reached across the table to hold his hand. I love you, Leo, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I know, he whispered. I just wish. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Suddenly, the chatter in the gym began to die down. It started near the doors and spread inward like a wave. Heads turned. A teacher dropped a clipboard. From outside, a low vibration began to shake the floorboards. It wasn't the sound of a passing truck. It was a rhythmic, thumping roar. It grew louder and louder until the windows in their frames rattled. It sounded like a thunderstorm had descended directly onto the school parking lot. The double doors of the gym swung open. The principal stood there, looking nervous but stepping aside. First came the sound of heavy boots on the linoleum. Thud, thud, thud. Then, Grizz walked in. He looked even bigger than Leo remembered. He was wearing his full colors, his boots polished to a shine, his sunglasses tucked into his vest. He wasn't smiling. He looked like a man on a mission. Behind him came Top, then Tiny, then Bam Bam, then the rest of them. 32 bikers, clad in black leather and denim, marched into the elementary school gymnasium. The room was dead silent. The other fathers, some in business suits, stared with mouths open. The teachers froze. Grizz scanned the room. His eyes locked onto the small boy in the corner. The scowl vanished. A grin broke across his bearded face. Leo, Grizz bellowed, his voice echoing off the rafters. Leo stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. He couldn't believe his eyes. It was the giant from the gas station. Grizz didn't stop walking until he reached Leo's table. The other 31 bikers fanned out behind him, creating a wall of black leather. A fortress of Brotherhood around the small table. I told you your dad had patches like ours, Grizz said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. We heard he couldn't make it today. He's on a long ride. So he called in a favor. Grizz knelt down, just like he had at the gas station. He sent us to stand in for him. If that's all right with you. Leo looked at his mom. Sarah was covering her mouth with her hands, tears streaming down her face, but she was nodding. She was smiling through the tears. Leo looked back at Grizz. The sadness that had filled his chest for 2 years began to crack. You came for me? We don't leave brothers behind, Leo, Grizz said. And your dad? He was a brother in arms. That makes you family. And nobody messes with our family. What would you do in this situation? If you were one of the other parents in that room, seeing this unfold, how would you react? Let us know in the comments below. The tension in the room broke. One of the bikers, a guy named Cookie who was nearly as wide as he was tall, produced a box from behind his back. I heard you like chocolate sprinkles, kid. These are from the good bakery, not the grocery store stuff. Leo laughed. It was a rusty sound, one he hadn't used much lately, but it was real. For the next hour, the Donuts with Dads event was transformed. The bikers didn't just stand there. They integrated. They sat at the tiny cafeteria tables, knees bumping against the metal. They ate donuts. They listened to Leo talk about his transformers. They looked at his drawings. Grizz sat right next to Leo, listening intently as the boy explained the difference between an Autobot and a Decepticon. The other kids, initially terrified, were soon inching closer. The cool factor of 30 motorcycles in the parking lot was undeniable. Soon, other children were coming over, asking to see the patches, asking about the bikes. Leo wasn't the lonely kid in the corner anymore. He was the center of the universe. He was the kid with 32 dads. But the most powerful moment came toward the end. Grizz stood up and cleared his throat. The room went quiet again. He reached into a saddlebag that another biker handed him. He pulled out a small leather vest. It was tiny, custom-made. On the back, it didn't have the club's Reaper logo that had to be earned. Instead, it had a beautiful, embroidered patch of a soaring eagle, just like the one Leo had described, and underneath it, the words, Leo Protector. Stand up, son, Grizz said. Leo stood up, trembling slightly. This is a cut, Grizz explained. In our world, this tells people who you are and who has your back. You wear this, and everyone knows that the Iron Reapers are watching out for you. Grizz slipped the vest over Leo's shoulders. It was a little big, room to grow. He snapped the buttons shut. You look sharp, kid, Top grunted from the side, giving a thumbs up. Leo ran his hands over the leather. He smelled the scent, that mix of oil, leather, and rain. It smelled like his dad. Thank you. Leo whispered, looking up at Grizz. Thank you for being my dad today. Grizz, the man who could stare down a loaded shotgun without blinking, felt his throat tighten. He blinked rapidly, fighting back moisture in his eyes. He placed a heavy hand on Leo's shoulder. We're not replacing him, Leo. No one can do that. We're just holding his spot until you're big enough to fill it yourself. The bikers walked Leo and Sarah out to the parking lot. The sun had finally broken through the clouds, gleaming off the chrome of the 32 motorcycles lined up like heavy cavalry. Grizz lifted Leo up and sat him on the seat of his massive Harley. He let the boy grip the handlebars. Start it up, Grizz said. Leo pressed the starter button. The engine roared to life, a thunderous sound that vibrated through the boy's entire body. He revved the throttle once, feeling the raw power of the machine. For the first time in 2 years, Leo didn't feel small. He felt powerful. He felt protected. The other parents and kids watched from the school steps, clapping and cheering. The bullies who had made fun of Leo's empty table stood in silence, eyes wide, realizing that picking on Leo was now the worst idea in the world. As the event wound down, Sarah walked up to Grizz. She reached out and took his rough, tattooed hand in both of hers. I don't know how to thank you, she said, her voice shaking. You have no idea what you did for him. For us. You don't need to thank us, ma'am, Grizz replied softly. We needed this just as much as he did. Sometimes we forget that there's innocence left in the world worth fighting for. Leo reminded us. Grizz turned to Leo, who was still sitting on the bike, a grin plastered across his face. All right, little man. We gotta roll. But this isn't goodbye. You got that vest. You got that coin. You need us, you call. We'll be listening. Leo hopped down, his new leather vest stiff but comforting around his ribs. I will. Bye, Grizz. See ya, Leo. The bikers mounted up. It was a symphony of engines firing, a mechanical choir singing in the school parking lot. One by one, they peeled out, waving to the boy in the vest. Grizz was the last to leave. He revved his engine, gave a sharp salute to Leo, and roared off onto the main road. Leo stood there watching them until the last rumble faded into the distance. He wasn't just a boy with a black eye or a boy with a missing dad anymore. He was part of something bigger. That night, Leo didn't cry himself to sleep. He hung his new vest on the bedpost where he could see it. He held the challenge coin in his hand. He realized that family isn't always who you're born with. Sometimes, family is the roar of an engine, a hand on your shoulder, and a group of strangers who decide that you are one of them. The bikers had saved the day, not with violence, but with presence. They showed up. And sometimes, in a world that can be cold and lonely, showing up is the most heroic thing a person can do. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Biker Stories for more powerful stories about courage, redemption, and the families we choose.